Hello, and welcome to Channel 96's broadcast of Talking Giants with your host, Brant Hurley. Hello, and welcome to Talking Giants. I'm your host, Brant Hurley, and today I'm quite excited, for we're talking about one of my favorite giants, as I'm sure he is one of yours, Johann Enrique Pestalozzi. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Johann was born in the year 1746 in Zurich, Switzerland. Unfortunately, tragedy struck young Johann early in his life when his father passed away. The passing of his father led his mother to take charge of the household. Due to a lack of a father providing for the family, they became poor. Because of this, Johann was sympathetic to the underprivileged. Later in life, Johann explored several fields of education before focusing his attention on agriculture in 1769. The idea of farming quickly died out as Johann came to realize that he really wanted to be an educator. In 1775, he turned his attention to teaching and transformed his farm into an orphanage where he taught children to be self-sufficient. Johann believed that teaching would be his contribution to society, to help the individual be self-reliant, which would eventually change society. Johann did not experience much success in his endeavors at his orphanage, but success did eventually come. In 1783, fame came to Johann through a book he wrote called Leonard and Gertrude, which was intended to express his views on education, but instead gained its popularity through the actual story. Although it was not truly appreciated for what it was, Leonard and Gertrude provided Johann with the means to pursue his real dreams. The fame of his book led Johann to Stans. Moving to Stans was a new beginning. This was where Johann's ideas, dreams, and practices all started to become realities. In Stans, the government offered him a position to teach higher education, but he instead opted to start at a much lower level of teaching. He opened another orphanage where he took in many destitute children. Johann single-handedly took care of and taught the orphans using his developing methods for teaching. Although exhausting at times, he recorded these few months at the orphanage as the happiest days of his life. Johann's actual teaching career started in 1800 when he ran a boarding school for boys for 4 years. Then, in 1805, at Verden, Johann became the director of a boarding school for boys. Over the next 20 years, this school would be the nurturing ground where his thoughts and philosophies on teaching would grow and be admired by many as an effective teaching method. He remained teaching at this boarding school in Verden until 1825, and only died a short time later in 1827. Now let us turn our attention to the accomplishments of this master teacher. One of the major beliefs in Johann's time was the use of strict memorization to educate children. Also, in general, the atmosphere of the classroom was one of strict obedience and very little tolerance on the teacher's part. Each child was taught in exactly the same way, so as to accommodate large groups. Johann sought to reform this type of education, and one of the first areas he sought to change was the practice of education through rote memorization. Johann was a strong believer that children needed to learn through activities and experience real-life examples. He would bring in plants to teach science and teach numbers using beans or pebbles. The idea of concentrating on experience-based learning was very unique for his time, but this idea wasn't the only thing that made him unique. While many of the educational institutions were concentrating on learning as a primary focus, Johann was a pioneer. He concentrated on the individual. Many other ideas sprouted from this root idea of individualism. For example, he also believed that teaching should concentrate on the moral side as well as the intellectual side. This particular idea is found in his book, How Gertrude Taught Her Children. Johann felt that empowering the individual through education, we might also empower society as a whole. In other words, he believed that the best way to change society was through the power of education. Johann placed a large amount of concern on what the student needed, and as a result his theories also included what the teacher needs to do to accommodate the student. He stressed that teachers should have a broad education, which then would be followed by specific training in a certain area of education. Many of his methods are still used today, which is a testament to just how effective they really are. In this part of the lecture, we're going to discuss the impacts that his achievements have in today's society. But before we move on, a quick joke to lighten the mood. One time, one of Pestalozzi's students walked up to him and said, "Mr. Pestalozzi, I don't understand it. No matter how hard I try, I can't learn to play cards. It doesn't matter how many books I've read or how many lectures I've listened to on playing cards, I still can't seem to do it." Pestalozzi simply looked at him and with exclamation said, "Deal with it." If you didn't get the joke, then you haven't been listening very well. It'd be a shame since that joke is a tearjerker, my goodness. Right, moving on. As we look at the educational platform of today, we see that many of Johann's practices are still used. Take for example elementary education. If you walk into an elementary school classroom, you will see many images line the walls. These images are used as a visual aid for the children to be able to learn a particular subject. For example, you might see a silly A with hands and arms smiling back at you, or something of that matter. In my particular educational classroom, each of the letters had names corresponding with their letter. For example, A was Alice, and B was Bob, all the way to Z. Z was... I don't quite recall what Z was, actually. But you get the point. In accordance with Johann's theory of focusing on the individual, programs are implemented. For example, parent-teacher conferences are designed to focus on the individual needs of each student and working with the parents to help that student out in specific areas. Other programs focus on specific children who have a little bit more of a difficulty learning and place these children in a program with a slower learning pace. Children who learn at a somewhat faster rate are also placed in a program to accommodate this ability. All of these programs stem from the idea of focusing on the individual. Johann expressed a great desire to have a positive effect on the world, and he truly has through giving the world effective teaching methods. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Talking Giants. Thank you so much for joining us.